Westward expansion really took off in the years immediately following the Civil War. This was taking place at a specific global moment in history. European nations and Japan were also industrializing, and all were conquering indigenous peoples and taking over their territory, a process known as imperialism. There was a worldwide scramble for Africa and Asia as industrialized nations sought to increase their access to markets and raw materials. Interestingly, the United States is the one industrializing country that is not competing for overseas colonies until 1898. Why? It's too busy with conquering the West. But to make possible a massive movement of Americans into the West, a few things occurred first. In order to move people and military forces out west, we needed to have a large government. Before the Civil War, the United States didn't have a government capable of that. Immediately after the war, though, it had a small standing army and a government capable of raising and maintaining the troops. They also had a Bureau of Indian Affairs to deal with the conflicts between Indians and settlers. Then, America experienced major industrial improvements, the most important for the West being an expansion of railroads and the invention of barbed wire. The first Transcontinental Railroad was completed in the 1860s. During the Civil War, Congress commissioned the Union Pacific Railroad to go westward from Omaha. On the California end, the rail laying was undertaken by the Central Pacific Railroad, which pushed eastward from Sacramento. The wetting of the rails was consummated near Ogden, Utah in 1869 as the two locomotives kissed. This Transcontinental Railroad was one of America's greatest peacetime achievements. It made it possible to move massive numbers of people into the West. It also became much more profitable for entrepreneurs to raise cattle and get them to market quickly. It also made it possible for the Army to move troops quickly into the area to fight Indians. You might have remembered that I also mentioned the invention of barbed wire. Barbed wire might sound simple to us today, but it was a game changer for the West. Unlike the East, the West didn't naturally have enough wood for building fences. Barbed wire was a cheap, yet very effective way for capitalist ranchers to mark off their territory. Enclosing territory had some major effects. While on the one hand it made ranching more profitable, it also limited the movement of Native Americans and livestock. Smaller ranchers ended up selling out to wealthy ranchers, leading to a concentration of power in the hands of just a few. Native Americans began referring to barbed wire as the devil's rope. Another game changer for the West was the rapid destruction of the buffalo. In the year 1800, there were 65 million buffalo roaming the plains. They roamed in massive herds of hundreds of thousands, creating such a sound that they earned the nickname Thunder of the Plains. These free-roaming large animals posed a threat to railroads and settlers alike. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, around 200,000 buffalo began to be killed every day. Massive parties of thousands of hunters from the east began to arrive by train, killing entirely for sport. According to a magazine from the time period, nearly every railroad train which leaves or arrives at Fort Hays on the Kansas Pacific Railroad has its race with these herds of buffalo, and a most interesting and exciting scene is the result. The train is slowed to a rate of speed about equal to that of the herd. The passengers get out firearms which are provided for the defense of the train against the Indians, and open from the windows and platforms of the cars a fire that resembles a brisk skirmish. General Sheridan of the American Army supported such extermination as a means to eventually wipe out the Indians, saying, "These men have done more in the last 2 years and will do more in the next year to settle the vexed Indian question than the entire regular army has done in the last 40 years. They are destroying the Indians' commissary, and it is a well-known fact that an army losing its base of supplies is placed at a great disadvantage." The results were devastating to the buffalo population. Although there were 65 million buffalo in 1800, by 1890 fewer than 1,000 remained, and only 300 buffalo were left in the wild by the end of the 19th century. All of these changes allowed for white Americans to migrate from the East into the West in large numbers, but the land they were taking wasn't exactly empty. Up until then, the United States policy was to push Indians west into the Great American Desert, which they considered undesirable land for whites. In fact, the United States Army had done a survey of this area in 1820, and the major in charge declared the region unfit and uninhabitable for a people dependent upon agriculture. This policy of pushing Indians onto undesirable land began to change in the 1850s, however, when the land became much more valuable.